Welcome back to another episode of the Twin Elements podcast, proudly presented by Venture Hunting and Outdoors. If you're like us and passionate about hunting, spearfishing, and many other outdoor-related pursuits, with an eagerness to fast-track your learning, then this podcast is perfect for you. G'day legends, and welcome back to another episode of the Twin Elements podcast. Today it might sound a little bit different or unusual to normal. James and I are just travelling back from regional Victoria, where we've hunted hog deer for the last 10 days, the first 10 days of April in 2026, and we're headed back north to our daily lives back at home. So we're doing today's podcast from the road. We've had an incredible hunt down there, experiencing hog deer hunting for the very first time, with some very, very frustrating hunting being probably the main takeaway. But we also did manage a beautiful hog deer stag between the two of us. So we're going to share some stories on that successful trip with you all, as well as just some of the ins and outs from the trips and general takeaways. As always, if you have any questions following this podcast, please send either James, myself, or the Twin Elements Instagram account a DM, or simply email info@twinelements.com.au, and we will do our best to answer you promptly and get the questions featured on the Twin Elements podcast. Without further ado, we'll jump in. Venture Hunting and Outdoors is Australia's premier hunting retailer, starting with a team of passionate hunters and the clear mission to give Australian hunters the resource they deserve. Through community events, top quality gear, exclusive deals, and expert guidance, Venture is more than a hunting store. Venture Hunting is a community. Check out their incredible megastore in Springwood, Brisbane today. Or, if you're in Victoria, make sure you head to their Hamilton store. The team stock epic brands that we love and support, including Numa Camouflage, Hoyt Archery, Cayuga Broadheads, Dog and Gun Coffee, Ebola Stock Packs, Leopold Optics, Carnivore Collective, and much, much more. Make sure to head in store and get to know their loyal staff, or if you're out of town, make sure you head to their website, www.venturehunting.com.au, to shop all things hunting and outdoors. We will see you there. So I feel like we'll start off at the beginning by explaining hog deer a little bit. So as many of you listening would know, we have a registered or recognised 6 species of feral deer here in Australia, which now call Australia home. Of course, they were introduced to Australia, a lot of them recognised as pests, whereas hog deer in Australia, in Victoria anyway, are recognised currently by legislation and management bodies as a game animal. So hog deer are very, very secretive. They are Australia's smallest deer species of the feral deer that exist here. For example, a hog deer typically weighs anywhere between around 50 kilos to probably 75 kilos live weight, and males, which are larger than females, typically stand between around 70 centimetres to 75 centimetres at adult maturity, with antler length growing up to around 16 inches being quite an exceptional trophy or quite an exceptional mature animal. Similar to sambar and chital deer, they have 3-tined antlers, so they have a brow tine, an inner tine, and then the overall long main beam that is generally their longest point. Appearance-wise, they're sort of a caramel, lighter to dark brown colour, very earthy sort of colour. They've got little blonde faces, whiter, paler ears, and sort of like, not necessarily like a white throat patch like a chital deer, but it is a little bit lighter. And to be honest, they're very, very nuggety little deer. They're quite dense, and I think that's potentially where their name hog deer comes from a little bit. They do, both in some appearances and even tendencies and behaviours, act a little bit like feral pigs or hogs. And that probably takes us a little bit towards the environment and the terrain that they live in. And so for a bit of context, hog deer were introduced to Australia in the 1860s in Victoria. They fairly quickly set up a bit of a home range down there, and where we were doing our hunting was in eastern Victoria, in the Gippsland region. So what is on offer for hunting is both private and public land opportunities, as well as public land balloted system, which is quite an interesting concept that we can talk about a little bit. But essentially for a fee, I think it's around $20, you can throw your hat in the ring to potentially hunt deer during a balloted system on a few different islands where they manage the hog deer populations down here in Victoria. We, on this hunt, were hunting private land, which is very much a benefit to us. It just means that a deer species that is very secretive and recluse, it made us have a lot more daylight hunting opportunities, whereas hog deer can very quickly become nocturnal through pressure and any sort of hunting human influences on them. So what's very interesting about hog deer is that because they're a game animal, in Victoria they are managed by the Game Management Authority, which means that in order to hunt hog deer you need to have an active hunting license in Victoria, and you get allocated 2 tags, one male of the species tag and one female of the species tag, and that essentially allows you to hunt only during the month of April. So if you have a license and get your tags as early as January, when I think you're allowed to, even if you have hog deer on your property in Feb, similar to the US, you're not allowed to hunt them until season opens on April the 1st at sunrise. As soon as it gets to April 30th or 31st, depending on how many days are in April, at sunset, you are no longer allowed to hunt hog deer going into May. You can check in hog deer on May 1st if you've shot a stag or female hind on April 30th or 31st, depending on the days. But it just really makes this species quite unique for a lot of ways. And it's a hunt that both James and I had never really experienced before, and heading into it, we were very, very excited for the opportunity.
I think we were, to be honest, like a little bit naive to the style of hunting. Like we hadn't really done a whole lot of research. Like Ayden had said, we were blessed with private access, and we hoped that that was going to be, you know, a catalyst for getting plenty of opportunities. But we learnt quite quickly that, you know, hog deer get and have a reputation, especially hunting them with the bow, for being very, very difficult to hunt. And they're very cunning animals. Like, they're called, you know, shadows of the grass for a reason, where because you're hunting all these even small sections of private, it's one thing on private property to see hog deer, it's another thing for them to be on your place. And so we were blessed to see hog deer, but which was a very different story to a couple of our friends who were hunting the public areas, in which case, because you're only hunting in the April period, as soon as they hear a gunshot, whether it be from like duck hunters or anything like that, or as soon as there's human scent on the ground, and people are walking around, you know, trying to find them the 1st of April or, you know, potentially before, they just go completely nocturnal. Like, we've got friends that go and start scouting like super early, and it's nothing to see, you know, plenty of hog deer in public land back in like January, February, March. But come the start of April, when people are in there actually hunting, just the pressure alone causes these deer to almost like disappear. And just like the habitat that they live in, where they live out on these like open grasslands that are just like a sea of tussock grass, generally mixed in with like what we call kabungi, or sort of like a big high cane reed, you know. And like Ayden said, like, these deer aren't very high and they're almost the color of the grass. And so like really most of the time you're not getting like a full body picture. Like, really you're lucky when you can just see even the tops of their back. Like, most of the time you just see, yeah, like the white of their tail or the white of their ears, or you see some antler tips or something like that. Like, it's very rare that you see a whole body shape, and hence why it's hard to shoot them with a bow, because yeah, there's always like brush in the way or whatever, but it's also just like physically finding these animals can be extremely difficult, especially on public, but even on private.
So this particular hunt started for us back in Feb. We'd actually been talking with the person that manages these properties. He lives down in Gippsland and has access to a plethora of private property that he sort of manages for the deer. He allows a few select friends to come down and do hunts. He sort of does a few hunt swaps, but mainly he just manages these places and hunts them for himself and his family. And he's got a history of basically hunting hog deer down in that area for a lifetime. Every year without failure, he bases his every April without failure. He spends the whole month trying to target a mature hog deer stag with the goal of, trying to add to his trophy room. He's got this amazing cabin which we stayed in for the last 10 days, and within there, it's to try and give you guys a bit of a visual representation of the cabin. It is not very big, but it's absolutely full of trophy room like mounts and things like that. It's full of old antiques and collectibles as well. It's very rustic. Like, think almost like old timber mill sort of cabin, something that you'd find up in the high country, Man from Snowy River sort of spec. It's made of timber. There's all old like SEC posts and sleepers and all these different things, like very rustic, all handmade. And it's something that, like, you can tell it's nearly going to stand the test of time because he's put so much time and effort into it. It's got this rock sort of fireplace. It's just like rich in hunting culture, and you can tell that, he's been hunting hog deer for a very long time, because he has some absolutely incredible mounts, starting off in the early days where he hunted only public land and the hog deer weren't in very much high population or abundance, to where now he's got private property where it's nothing for him to go out and see 10 deer for an afternoon or a morning out of season, or even in season in the early days before pressure starts. So he's got, just as an estimate, probably 15 to 20 mounts of hog deer in this little cabin, let alone the hundreds of cast antlers that he's amassed over years of walking it, putting trail cameras out, all this type of stuff. So we rocked up to this destination in Feb in 2026, so a few months ago, and we were down in Victoria for a wedding, but took the opportunity to come down, meet the property owners, catch up with our friend who manages the properties, and he basically gave us a rundown of this parcel of private property that we're going to be hunting. And to give it a bit of a description, it's very much a unused little section of private property amongst a lot of other dairy farms. So naturally, straight away, because he's got no cattle on the place, it's sort of purchased more for water applications and licenses on his other properties, where he can take water from underground and basically use that for irrigation for crops and things like that for his dairy cattle. He's essentially left this as, unintentionally of course, but as a refuge for these hog deer, so they feel very safe, happy on his block. The benefit then is that on all these surrounding blocks, he either has access to those blocks or knows of someone hunting those blocks. So he's sort of created this little mecca of hog deer access where the deer aren't really pressured. Again, you can only hunt one stag and one female during the month of April, so it's very much a bit of a breeding ground for these deer. And as a result, like, we were basically put in prime time, and in Feb, because it wasn't season, there was no hunting, but we went down there and we were just doing some scouting, and incredibly, we saw in our first afternoon sit quite a number of hog deer, including a couple of stags, which it's kind of a little bit of false sense of like security, in the sense that you get down there, you sit in this tall elevated blind, which we should probably describe in some detail here as well, just because this blind that I'm about to talk about almost became our home for the last 10 days. Like, we spent more time in the blind than in our beds over the last 10 days. We were up there from a sparrow's fart at daylight, sitting in this, it's basically a constructed little fort that stands probably about 3 meters tall, I'd say, from ground. You climb up this little steel ladder, that's screwed into the side of a wooden sort of base platform on a plastic pallet. Then you've got a box around you with mesh or Hessian sort of mesh, I think you'd sort of describe it as. And that's like just a green sort of Hessian, just so the deer can't see into where you're standing. And then our friend's literally gone to the point where he goes and sits in there all the time out of season, just doing scouting and things like that, watching the deer. Like, as I said, he's got an obsession, literally just loves seeing the deer. He's, to the point, got a little barber's stool chair in there that he can swivel on and just glass 360 degrees around him. So it really is designed for, in a very flat, low topography, no elevation sort of area, to give you the advantage to be able to get up an extra 3 meters as if climbing a tree, sit in comfort, sit in a blind that just sits in there in situ, never moves. He's put it in there, and it essentially is just, you climb into it, sit down, and you're anchored in there. You're just watching and observing the deer.
Oh, and I think, like, obviously our friend has a lifetime of hog deer hunting experience under his belt. He, in terms of his trophy room, I mean, it's a reflection of also, like, he's dedicated his life to hog deer, but I think he's dedicated his life to hunting as well. You know, like, he lives in an area that's a super game-rich environment, but does plenty of fox shooting, duck hunting. You know, like, he's almost a scholar of hunting, really, in the sense that he, you know, like, he's got mounts of, he's done all the species and everything. And, like, obviously being in the area that he's in, he's very much prioritized hog deer, and so he's, like, incredibly knowledgeable, in them. But I think just all aspects of hunting is very switched on. But his trophy room really is something that inspires you to definitely keep hunting, and was a bit hard to, as we'll get into later in the podcast, it was hard to come back to almost every day in some ways, because, you know, you spend all day looking at these beautiful animals, trying to get an opportunity, and then you come back and it just puts into reality almost, like, the amount of time and effort that he's put in to get all these mounts and trophies, because, yeah, like Ayden said, there's some giant hog deer in there that you're looking at, you know, when you're eating your dinner and your breakfast and having a coffee and so on and so forth. But I think the hide as well, like Ayden said, it's just it was something essential. Like, we worked out pretty quickly that any elevation, like including fence posts or ladders or anything, was, like, essential to hunting these hog deer. Like, because they were almost impossible to see in the grass without some form of elevation. Like, you really needed, like, whenever we had a wind direction that wasn't, the prevailing wind direction, and we're having forced to go somewhere else on the block, like, we were immediately up on a corner post, and that's where we would stand for 2 or 3 hours, you know, trying to locate hog deer from there, or even get ladders and literally just set them up, and climb to the highest step or the second highest step, depending on how windy it was, just so that you're, like, 1.5 meters or 2 meters off the ground, and then you're constantly looking 360 to try and see these hog deer, because, like, yeah, they're just incredibly difficult to spot in this environment, like I said earlier. And you really only catch glimpses of them. It very much was an all-day hunt or situation where, depending on, like, the weather conditions, like, sometimes most of the activity that we saw was actually in the middle of the day, because what we found out was that they just absolutely hate the wind. Like, anything over sort of 5 knots, these deer would just go completely to ground, and, like, it was nothing to, like, not see them for 5 or 6 hours, and then all of a sudden the wind would drop off a little bit and the sun would come out, and then you're like, oh, there's a hog deer. Oh, you look another direction. Oh, there's a hog deer. Oh, there's a hog deer. Like, they're very sort of patternable in that sense, where you can just, you can see the factors. Like, they really like the sun. They absolutely hate the wind. Like, if it's a light rain or drizzle, they don't mind that. But if it's, like, proper raining and obviously the wind's up, then they're just, like, nowhere to be seen. And the problem is, it's not like a fallow deer or a red deer or something where you might be able to go and find them in the thick brush. Like, these things that are only, 2 feet, 3 feet high, 2 feet high, go into 12 feet high kabungi or reed, or they bury themselves into blackbush, and you've just got no chance of getting in there and actually trying to create an opportunity. The other thing that is super hard with these deer is you can't exactly go and walk around and create opportunities, because any form of like scent on the ground or inadvertently getting winded or something like that, that just adds to the pressure, which any form of pressure that they get, same thing, they just disappear and go to ground and go nocturnal and stuff. And rather than them coming out in the middle of the day, or getting up from a bed in the middle of the day, or even bedding in a spot that is accessible to us to hunt as hunters, they just stop doing all of that. And so really it just forced us to make this sort of 3 meter high wooden blind or stand, whatever we want to call it, as our like home base. And that's pretty much where, like Ayden said, we just ended up spending like 90% of our time looking for these hog deer.
If you're an Aussie hunter, you already know those early starts are brutal. Rolling out of the swag at 4 a.m, freezing cold, eyes half shut, and all you want is a coffee that actually hits. That's why I use Dog and Gun coffee. Roasted here in Australia, Dog and Gun makes coffee for people who live outdoors. Hunters, fishers, campers, the whole lot. Their brews are strong, smooth, and pack enough punch to get you moving up the mountain before first light. And the best part, you can get it as beans, grounds, or lightweight instant sachets that actually taste like real coffee when you're on the mountain. Whether you're heading bush for a week or just brewing up home before work, Dog and Gun keeps you fueled for whatever adventure you're chasing. Check them out at dogandguncoffee.com and use code TWIN10 to get $10 off your first order and upgrade your camp coffee today.
So on April 1st, I was up first with the bow, James in the stand with me with the camera gear, and our friend was also in the stand because, like every other year previous to that, he had 2 tags burning in his pocket, one for a male, one for a female. And to be honest, like leading into April, he was sending us the odd trail cam picture because, again, part of his scouting of just being out there, checking on these properties, glassing up the deer, sitting in the stand, trying to pattern them, see what's around from year to year, like, whether the 14-inch stag that he left to let grow last year is now a 15, 16-inch model, or vice versa. If the 16-incher that he couldn't get last year is still there, or if he's gone backwards, and all these sorts of scenarios. So he's sending us trail cam pics, which obviously kept us very, very excited, very in the loop. And, there was no limit on the number of deer that he'd sent us photos of. Like, in all honesty, he probably assumed that there was around 30 or so deer anywhere at any time on this property or the neighbouring sort of properties within a probably 3 or 4 kilometre sort of area. So immediately on the 1st of April, as someone that's never hunted hog deer, there's a very, very good opportunity to see a hog deer. Add to that a stag that I would be more than willing to try and target. So there was a certain buzz that morning. I guess the only consideration for me was that we did have another hunter in the blind. So straight away you sort of almost, I feel like, not necessarily compromise, but you do make decisions that are a little bit different to like what we would normally do or how we would normally hunt. And also the main difference, I think, was that we were bow hunting and our friend is a rifle hunter. So like that's for me a huge way that dictates how you hunt. Like, for example, our friend was very, very happy to sit in the blind, see deer at 200 meters and be like, oh yeah, if that was a deer I wanted to shoot, I could kill him. So I'm in the right spot. Whereas for us, simply seeing a deer on our side of the property or our side of the fence at 200 meters means that we've got 200 meters of no man's land to try and identify where that stag beds with the right conditions, try and sneak in on him and kill him. So immediately for me, it became very, very apparent that, not dissimilar to any other deer species, but a massive consideration for me, even when we go to America and hunt elk. It's like, I'm not going to go and bugle and the first elk I see is going to be one that I kill. Very rarely do you go and have one stalk on an animal or one calling ambush or situation like that and end up with the animal that you have dreamt of. Like, it's a odds thing. It's I'm going to stalk an animal 10 times, and every time I'm going to learn how to refine my stalking on this particular species, in this particular environment, in this particular weather pattern, blah, 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 to work out what factors, what little things I need to do to alter or continue to do correct or wrong, like, and implement, so you're not doing the same mistakes over and over again until finally we find success. And that for me is that pathway of bow hunting. It is being extremely hyper focused on what's working, doing that more so, working out what's not working, and then refining those acts and those decisions. And I think for me, part of the struggles in the first part of the trip were, to be honest, a lot of the deer we were seeing were on the neighbour's place. And it was kind of a little bit tricky because you would try and, again, with hog deer, it seemed like the more hog deer you see, the better. As a general rule with any deer, like if I'm hunting the fallow deer rut, more deer croaking or more deer seen is better. But I've learnt over time, again, maybe in the way that I bow hunt, I would rather hunt an area with less deer density, with a higher male to female ratio and better terrain for spot and stalking, and have one opportunity on one deer that I would like to shoot, than basically have no chance of shooting a deer but seeing 10 of them for the day, if that makes sense. And I feel like very quickly on this trip it kind of got to the point where it was no other word to describe it but just frustrating, in the sense of like, you'd raise your binos, oh yeah, there's a beautiful stag, oh shit, can we hunt there? Nah, he's 200 meters over the fence. And then you're kind of sitting there just watching this stag all day, especially if the weather's nice. Like, these deer bed out in the open, and when we say open, it's open from an elevated position, like you can almost like look down into the grass if it's short enough. But when you get down there and actually step foot on the ground, it is so dense, sometimes noisy, crunchy, long, tangled blackberry thickets. There's dock, there's cane grass, as James was saying earlier. There's just all of these little obstacles that mean that once you actually lose that elevation and step foot on the ground, trying to almost get onto their level, you realize very quickly that like that advantage that you had in the elevation of the blind is completely lost. And then it's nearly a free-for-all. It's nearly like start again hunting. Like, now you've got to try and use landmarks on the horizon as, oh, that's where he last was, hopefully he's still there. And another thing we learnt about these deer is like, when they're bedded, they're pretty happy bedded, just tucked away, but seeing them or relocating them, it's sort of like, oh, I last saw him there, hopefully he's bedded there. If not, he could have just gone into a high patch of vegetation and never be seen again. But if they're moving, and the second they decide to get up and start feeding, they're not like other deer where they'll like feed in a spot for like 10 seconds, take a few steps, feed for a few seconds. It's almost like they walk, and on the walk they're grazing or browsing or nibbling on grass, and it's like, I've got to get from A to B and intercept those animals. And again, with the bow, it just made it extremely challenging. And the first few days, it was amazing to see these deers and be learning, and have our friend in the tree stand with us saying like, oh, that's a nice deer, oh, there's 2 hinds out here, they like that little area because it's a good little windbreak. And like, it really felt like, again, through his knowledge and I guess expertise on this particular patch of area and with this species of deer, like, we got a fast track to hog deer hunting, but it never really felt like we were more on like a hog deer watching sort of expedition at that point in time, rather than a bow hunting trip. And yeah, again, like, this word frustration was just building up. Like, it was this, oh, we've only got X amount of days, because James and I were both bow hunting. We went, okay, a 10-day trip, 5 days each. Hopefully we can get a stalk in this period. And very quickly it started getting to like day 2, day 3, day 4, before we'd even really left the blind and had any opportunity on a stag.
Yeah, it's an interesting experience, because like the height itself, because you're so elevated, you can see pretty flat country, so you can actually see a fairly long way, which is what it was designed for. But the curse of that is like the block that we were sort of only hunting was like a very long strip, where it might have been just say 1.5 kilometers long, but it was only probably 250 meters, maybe 300 meters wide. And so, and where the stand for the prevailing wind direction, mainly coming out of the east, the hide was set up on the far west side of the block, like literally on a high bank on the boundary fence. So like there were deer, like there were stags during the trip that we saw that were only 80 meters, 100 meters over the boundary fence, and happily just grazing there for periods that were like, that you couldn't go and hunt, which, you know, is obviously, like Ayden said, the word of the trip, frustration, quickly became very frustrating in the sense, like we were sort of seeing a lot of deer, but there was not that much that we could do. And like we're sitting there going, well, what can we, like, you know, what can we do? And our friends like, just be patient. Like they sort of move around in a circle almost, and like have this like grazing pattern almost, where they move through areas where, so you have like, you know, they'll be there and then they'll come here for 2 days or 3 days and then they'll go. And then, so really it's just like, and then like we said, it's not like you can go, it's only a couple of 100-acre block. So it's not like you could easily walk it in a morning, but then you've scared everything off your block. And the more pressure you put on your block, like the neighboring places weren't even getting hunted. So then it's sort of like, well, you just push them all off the block, and even if they're then only 100 meters over the fence, they're not going to get shot. So really we were just confined to the blind for the period, which, it was, like Ayden said, it was a hard concept for us probably to get in the first couple of days, especially because we're very much, I don't know if pragmatic is the right word, but like Ayden said, like we're super analytical people, and it probably comes from the bow hunting side of things, where it's like, okay, well, what things are working, what can we do differently to try and make our odds better, or see more deer, or, you know, even get a chance or a stalk and stuff. And like everything we were sort of coming up with had a negative impact on our actual success in some way or another, where it's like ultimately it was just like, you've just got to sit there. And so then like really it was just like, okay, time in the blind, and just like glass until it feels like your eyeballs are bleeding. And like every day it's like you finish the day and like, I don't know what happened to my eyes, but like my right eye by the end of it, like I'm left eye dominant, and my right eye by the end of most days was like, I couldn't even see properly out of it. Like the vision was like blurred, where I don't know if it's just like eye strain or something like that. I'm just spending like all day looking through like spotting scopes and binoculars. But like, my eye, like by the end of the day, like, and I know Ayden was the same, like there was days that you'd go to bed with like a headache from just looking through your optics, like for 12 hours in the day.
Yeah, that was super real sort of issue for me. Again, like I live through my optics when I'm hunting chital deer up north, but I think just sitting in the blind, again, because it's so cool here in Victoria, you're probably not drinking enough water, and you're literally just searching for a tiny antler that's 16 inches in length. So it's not really tall and obvious. These tiny little deer hiding in pretty thick brush, and you're looking through optics all day. And I think it might have been on the second day, we'd put in a massive day, again, like trying to optimize our chances. We've only got 10 days, so we weren't going home and having lunch. We were sitting in the stand all day, like even in times when it was like, you know, it could be a bit of a dead zone. And I'm really glad we did, because in retrospect, like looking back on it, it just meant that we saw so many deer, and if they had been on our side of the fence, it would have given us a lot more opportunities, because as James said earlier, like the wind ended up being our biggest sort of adversary. Like there were days towards the end of the trip where we didn't see a single hog deer for 10 hours because the wind was blowing 15 to 20 knots. And then there were days earlier in the trip when, you know, most of the time hog deer are active dawn and dusk, like most deer species. But during the middle of the day, they'd get out because the sun had come out, the wind had died down, and just in what would otherwise be a lull period or a quiet time of the day, we would see 5 hog deer sort of stand, feed from A to B quickly. It might only be 100, 200 meters, and then rebed down. But if that had been a stag on our side of the fence, that's that opportunity we were chasing. And by being there diligently and consistently in that stand, it afforded us more, I guess, sightings. But I just remember after this second day, like I got home after dark and I just had this throbbing headache to the point where I actually vomited a few times and was sitting there. I was starving. We hadn't really eaten lunch or anything like that. Probably hadn't drank enough water. I think like my temple was so sore again, like right on the edge of my sort of brow, where I guess just from sitting there glassing, like I wonder if I'd like strained my eye muscles or something like that. But it was just excruciating. And to be honest, it was quite a sunny day, so there was a lot of like heat haze and glare, and you're continually rack focusing your binoculars trying to see these deer. And I remember at that point just thinking, geez, like this hog deer hunting might not be for me. Like it's great seeing them, but at some point I'd really like to have a stalk. And thankfully that's where on day 3, I believe it was, we managed to get out of the blind. Now it had been a couple of days with very little action, seeing a lot of deer, but very little action in terms of close encounters. So when the opportunity presented where a nice sort of deer or stag materialised from that thick cane grass, we made our way out of the blind with a good breeze in our face and started stalking him. So what actually happened was, from the blind, I had a pretty good landmark with a tree on the horizon. Okay, he's within probably 100 of that dead tree. I'll head towards that basically, not as quickly as I could, but at a rate where I can glass what's in front of me. But what was very apparent the second you dropped out of that blind and started making our approach was just how many hog deer there were that had remained unseen for the whole day until that afternoon, within 100 meters of the blind, that physically just you could not see even from a 3 meter elevated blind. Like the vegetation was so thick and tall, like we were nearly wading through this long dry grass and dock at about sort of waist height in certain areas. And then again, you imagine a deer that's only 70 centimeters at the shoulder, especially if it's a hind or a fawn or a little spiker with short antlers, you're not even going to see those animals above the vegetation. So we'd started our approach on this stag and actually bumped a hind which bounded over the grass, and the only reason we saw her was that we saw this white tail flash up as a bit of an alarm to other animals. And thankfully, again, she only ran probably 100 meters between us towards these other deer. But what worked in our favor was, although we couldn't see her in the long grass, neither could the other deer. They couldn't see her bounding away. So the stalk was still on. We still had that landmark that we were approaching. And to be honest, as we got closer, the wind had died off, which is probably why those hog deer had emerged for the afternoon and we were able to make a play on them. But it was so loud and crunchy that, again, never hunting hog deer, I was probably treating them as another deer species that's probably more switched on to noise and visual sort of cues of predation, or us being the hunters in this instance. Whereas I got a bit of critique on my stalk later, and the friend that we're with was like, no, you can literally like run at them in that sort of situation, get to like 30 or 40, lay eyes on them, and then slow right down for the last like 20 meters, say. Whereas I thought, at 50 to 100, I'll slow down because I don't want these deer to be educated to some sort of threat coming their way. Like I was treating them as a different sort of species, where that's just where the inexperience on this particular species obviously comes in. Are you in the market for serious boots for all feet, terrain and adventures? Well, look no further than Lower Boots. We have been running the Lower GTX3s for many, many years now. I've lost count of how many years and adventures we've had these boots without so much as a blister. They are flexible enough while still being supportive. I run them across multiple land types, whether it's in the Northern Territory floodplains, the mountains of Montana, or the basalt wall country in North Queensland, Australia. The team at Lower have extended their generosity to you, our valued listeners, and supplied us with a unique discount code. Head to their website and let them know we sent you. Use code TWINELEMENTS10 at checkout for 10% off your next order. If you're like me and enjoy trying things before you buy, then head in store to Venture Hunting. They have their Springwood Megastore as well as their smaller store in Hamilton, Victoria. Enjoy the benefits of trying before you buy and get the perfect fit. Wear Lowers on your next hunt. Your feet will thank you for it.
Yeah, I think it's just because, which makes sense. Like if you know, if we can barely see them in the grass, then their vision is obviously going to be heavily impeded, like looking out. Like it's not like that's probably the negative for their sensory, you know, on predation, in the sense that like we can barely see them, but like they can't really see us either. Like obviously when you're above the grass at 20 or 30, you're like very visible. But when you're like 200 meters away or 100 meters away, like, you know, that line of projection, like they've almost got to look through a lot of grass to try and see you. Same thing with like, even if you've got like a mild breeze blowing, like that's enough to be moving the grass. And like Ayden said, like one of their biggest things that they did was as soon as they got up to go somewhere or feed, like it's most of the time they were like almost on this march where they'd get up and just start walking a direction. And like obviously when they're moving through the grass, like the grass is like going past their ears and stuff like that, and just them walking would be making their own sounds, and even just like having like the backup sounds of like crickets and stuff going off at this time of year in that area. Like I think you can get away, like we were sort of treating them, I don't know, like I guess like probably little chiddle deer or something like that, where it's like, yeah, you know, they are extremely switched on. Like don't get me wrong, like they'll pick you out and hear you and all the rest of it, but it's just more the fact that like their world and like almost their bubble of sensory, you know, acuteness is only maybe limited to like 70 meters, because they just like can't see that, you know, they're too small to see over the grass past that. Like unless they're like down in some really short stuff, but then they never really sort of were in that, you know what I mean? Like they were normally in the higher stuff. And so, yeah, like we definitely took it a bit, I don't know, I guess we were a bit sort of slower and a bit, I don't know, I shouldn't say scared, but like, yeah, we were probably a bit slower at the start, just not aware of like what we could get away with.
I would just say we were overly hesitant, and I think that was curated in us because we'd spent 2 to 3 days sitting in a blind waiting for an opportunity, and then we finally get this opportunity where we're like, okay, there's a stag that I would happily shoot. He's on our side of the fence. Let's go stalk him. Like we've got the wind in our face. So there was this element of, I've waited 3 days. I don't want to stuff this up. At least for me, like, and I just know that I treat every stalk as like, I'm going to kill this animal if I'm starting to stalk it, starting to call it. It's just that principle of, it's not going to be we'll just, you know, throw our hat in the ring, see how it goes and treat it, you know, sort of a bit blasé. And in this instance, yeah, it was probably to our downfall, because we ended up getting in probably to around that 50 meter mark by the time that we re-identified the stag, maybe even a little bit further. But the main issue was that I could only see the stag, which was the person we were with estimated him to be probably at around that 13-inch mark. So a beautiful deer, definitely a representative, mature sort of animal. And the issue was we could only really see him when he lifted his head way above the grass, and you could only really see the tops of his antlers. Like I could barely even see his face and eyes and things like that. So if you can imagine, like he's in quite tall grass. Add to that complexity that by the time it had taken for us to go down and close that probably 200 meters to get into where we last saw him, another deer had entered the fray, and this was in the form of a young stag that we didn't even really know about until we'd seen him pop up at about 40 meters. And he ended up being a 10-inch stag, and he'd basically walk through. I had 2 hinds. I had a hind and a fawn just in front of me at about 20 to 30 meters between me and the stag. So I was sort of just waiting on them, and they were in a bit of a low spot grass-wise or vegetation cover-wise, so I could see their backs fairly clearly. So I was just sitting there waiting for them and hoping that the stag which was behind them, would come and join them, and I'd potentially be able to get a shot at like 20 to 30 meters. While this was all happening, just to my left, there were 2 spikers that I could only see when they lifted their head as high as they could, and I'd barely even see the spikes. So that just gives you a bit of context as to like what we're dealing with. Like there's 5 to 6 deer in front of us between 0 to probably 60 meters. And aside from when they raise their heads completely to like look and listen for danger, I can't see them. So this 10-inch deer comes from the left, walks in between the 2 spikers, which sort of pushes them a little bit further away, comes in to check out the hind and fawn. And as a result, they sort of run off from where they're sitting at 20 or 30 meters over to where that initial stag is that I'm stalking. The 10-inch stag sort of follows her up, follows them into the long cane grass, and we basically never see those deer again. They just, again, had moved off into that long cane grass, whether they popped up another 50 meters past that. But we essentially just sat there glassing, not really wanting to move too much forward because we didn't want to encroach their like bedding areas with no more lead as to where these deer were, no more land markers to identify where they'd gone, and just super thick vegetation and daylight sort of fading on us. We decided to actually back out, head back to the blind, and basically see it out for the rest of the evening. There was only a matter of minutes left before dark or before available shooting light, and that was pretty much day 3 just done. And like that, it kind of gave us like it nearly left me more frustrated again, because it was like, I'm waiting for this opportunity, and now that I've had the opportunity, I've realized like how nearly impossible it felt. Like even with those hinds at 20 to 30 meters, if that was the 13-inch stag, I wouldn't have been able to shoot them purely because the grass was covering their vitals. And it kind of put into context that like, unless these animals walk into a very much like raised bank in the vegetation, or an area that's like a road or a track or an accessibility point or a dam bank or something like that, like I'm physically not going to be capable of shooting one of these deer, even if I can identify them from the blind, can sneak down there on foot, get to within bow range. Like there's a very real chance they're just going to be hidden by brush. And like that night I'm sitting there thinking, and like I remember we were driving back and I was saying to James, like, this nearly seems like impossible. Like I almost feel like we're approaching this the wrong way. Like we would be better off sitting over like water or something like that, where there's a 10-meter bank around the water source or a dam, and we're just banking on one animal to come through at one time throughout the day, and you're within 20 to 30 meters of it on a raised area, hoping you're not going to get spotted at 20 to 30 meters, but at least you've got a shooting sort of area that you can, you know, if an animal walks through, everything's got to go right where he doesn't see you, smell you before all that, but at least you'd be able to shoot him if he was in the right spot. And it was just, yeah, it left me sort of scratching my head going like, we're a bit over our depths here trying to hunt these little animals. It's already hard enough, and then the vegetation was just making it so much harder.
Oh, and that's when I think it like really dawned on us like why they get their name, and why they like get their reputation, for being, you know, so difficult to hunt, and often why they're like the last species of the 6 deer species that, you know, people shoot that try and get all of the ones in Australia. Because like, firstly, if you don't have private land access, like you barely even see a deer on public land, and it's quite difficult to get any opportunity, let alone here we are on some like very good private, you know, and we're seeing plenty of deer, but then it's still like, seeing plenty of deer doesn't mean you get many opportunities. And then even then, if you get an opportunity, well, like we worked out, well, hey, like we're probably going to need it to, like, even if you're at 20 meters, like you may need it to walk into an area, like you may need to sit there for a couple of minutes and even hopefully let it get into an area that you might be able to get an arrow away. You know what I mean? So that's where it's just like, shit, this is like, and that's what I mean when I said earlier about we were probably a little bit naive, because like we'd seen, like with the scouting and stuff, like we'd seen a lot of deer, you know, we'd seen our friend's trophy room and stuff. Admittedly, yes, he's a rifle hunter, but like, you know, for us it was like, oh, well, clearly he's obviously shooting that top 1% of like really incredible deer most of the time, especially like recently, sort of the last 15 years. And so, you know, it's like, oh, this, you know, like this should be easy. And then like you're out there and you're just like sitting there for hours and hours and hours, and like, yeah, like Ayden said, it's just like a pretty miserable feeling, I guess, where it's just like, you just feel like there's nothing you can change or do different. And like, it's almost like you just need them to put themselves into a position that you can like, yeah, actually get an arrow away, and like, well, firstly, even stalk them, and then secondly, pray to get an arrow away.
On top of all this, it's probably worth pointing out at this sort of point in time, I guess, that so whilst I was also hunting, we had seen, I don't want to make out that that was the only stag that we'd seen on our side of the private. Like we were seeing probably 1 to 2 stags each day on our side of the private. One of the issues was that it was an issue for me, not an issue overall in the grand scheme of things. It was probably a luxury that we were also seeing 2 particular deer at certain points in time. Like it might have been the second morning, I think we saw both of these deer. One was a 15-inch or so mature stag with a really good left-hand side antler, and then his right-hand side antler was malformed. And this was a deer that the property manager, I guess, had seen the year before. He was a shooter the year before. He estimated him to be around that 16-inch sort of mark, but he wasn't sure if the antler was snapped off on his right-hand side or malformed. That's all he really had to go off. He knew that it was an old deer being around that 16-inch mark and the shooter, but he also hoped that it was just broken off at the main beam, because even though they're little deer and they're quite pretty, similar to a chital, these hog deer do fight quite hard when they rut. So he gave him the benefit of the doubt. Again, only having one tag for the year, he'd hoped to take a mature deer that was at the right point in taking. He gave that deer another year to sort of, prove himself. If he was going to grow a second antler, this was the year to do it. Coming into this year, he quickly realised, no, that antler's malformed. And as it turns out, he had pedicle damage, or damage to his skull, basically, some form of injury, which had caused his right-hand side antler to grow abnormally. So this year, it was all right, green light. I've given that deer every benefit to grow 2 normal antlers. He's not going to. This is a deer I'd like to shoot, just because it's a unique animal, it's old, it's mature, all of those things. At the same point in time, he also had a deer leading into this season that he described as being quite secretive. And again, because he doesn't hunt them earlier in the year, he's only scouting until he can legally hunt them in April. He goes out there a lot of afternoons. He'll literally go and sit there in the afternoon and have a beer from his blind. It's his way of watching tally, essentially. Instead of going home after work and having a beer at home and watching TV, he'll go out, sit in his blind, wait till sunset, and just enjoy Mother Nature from the stand. He's constantly patterning these deer. The only issue is that he'd only seen this stag that he'd nominated as this year's shooter, a really even, heavy sort of 15 to 16-inch deer. He'd only seen him in January, and then didn't see him again until about 3 days before season, which I guess is the right time that you want to be seeing him. So they were the 2 deer that he had basically had on his hit list, and then everything else that was mature that fell between that probably 10 to 16-inch mark that, I would have been happy to shoot, was essentially free reign. We had amazing access and permission, and very much a generous offer to take a deer of that caliber. Where it got a little bit tricky was just the logistics of having 2 of us in the blind. And for example, there were a few mornings where it got a little bit hard to explain in the video of we've seen a beautiful stag at 200 meters. He's probably 15 to 16 inches, but I'm not going to get out of the stand and go and stalk him. And the person that we were with didn't want to shoot him at 200 meters. He'd rather shoot him at 100 meters, but he didn't want to get out of the stand and risk blowing him and risk failing a stalk because the stag was moving to a bedding area. So that was sort of an unseen part of the hunt, which we try to document a little bit, but it was sort of hard to just explain all that for 5 minutes like I just have in a video. But that was sort of a dynamic that was going on behind the scenes the whole time. And there was a few instances where we'd seen one of these big mature stags that our friend was interested in taking go into a patch of brush. 3 or 4 hours later, another stag would emerge from that brush, and it was a perfect opportunity to go and stalk it. But if I had have gone and stalked it and my wind had have busted that dominant stag or the mature stag, I wouldn't have been able to, I would have felt extremely guilty in prioritizing my success over someone who's given us amazing access, if that makes sense. So there was this constant dynamic there that meant that even when there were little half chances, we probably didn't take them. And that all sort of changed on day 5, which was actually my last hunting day, when our friend actually took his stag and he ended up taking the malformed stag. And that sort of allowed us to change our hunting strategies a lot more, where we were then able to put into practice basically okay, we've seen a nice stag, we think he's in a position, again, wanting to maximize on, if I can have 10 stalks on hog deer, that's going to get me a lot closer to if I have 2 stalks on hog deer. So that then enabled me to, on my 5th day of hunting, he'd shot a stag, I end up going and having my best experience for the trip.
Yeah, and it was actually our friend that sort of pushed us a bit, because he obviously warned us about putting pressure on these deer, but we'd seen a stag at first light, that sort of 11 to 12 inch mark go and bed up like right on the edge, or like he walked to the edge of the really thick kabungi, and like we sort of didn't see, like it's very hard to describe, because like these deer, like even in the grass, like you go, oh, I'm pretty sure he just bedded, and then like they've just disappeared for like 5 minutes, and like, and then you pick them up like 10 meters later in a different lower patch. You're like, oh, actually no, he's still up. And like you think they're bedded, but it's just that you can't see them. Like when they don't have their heads up, you know, you can stare there for as long as you want. You just can't see them. And so we'd seen where we thought this stag had bedded on this sort of edge of the fence line between like a feeding area, like more open paddock, and then like a paddock where it's sort of been reverted, because they haven't grazed this out paddock for a while. It's more reverted back to like kabungi, where it's, you know, like I said, that sort of 10 to 12 feet high. And so, yeah, we were like, we're pretty sure he bedded on the fence line, but he could have just gone into, you know, the thick stuff. And we were actually sitting there watching, like hoping that, because on that 5th day, the weather was quite nice. It wasn't super windy, it was sunny. And we're hoping that he would get up in the middle of the day and sort of walk around and then re-bed in a location that we could get, firstly, a bit more of a read on exactly where he'd bedded, and secondly, a little bit more favourable stalking opportunity. And that's where our friend, actually, we were talking to him at lunchtime, and he's like, oh, well, look, you guys need to get as many chances on your belt as you can get. You know, I'd just go in there and try and make something happen.
It was the green light that I'd been waiting for. Like, again, I try and be very, very courteous, and I feel like I'm a little bit quieter. Like, a lot of people vision me as being a bit quieter than James normally, but hearing this green light, I was like, all right, beautiful. I last saw this stag there by that green bush that's on, or a bit of grass that's growing over that fence line. The wind should be right if we come in from this direction. Let's go. So we basically like hop down out of the blind. It's middle of the day, and to be honest, like I was a little bit nervous in the sense of like, we haven't seen this stag for probably 3 or 4 hours now. So he could be there, he might not be there. The odds are he's probably not there. Like we'd, in this point in time, seen other, you know, hinds and little spikers moving around. Like it was an absolutely perfect day. The breeze was starting to get up a little bit, but I just thought, actually, this is perfect. If he is there, it's going to give us a little bit of noise concealment as we approach, obviously with 2 of us moving through long grass, blackberries, all these different vegetations that are grabbing at you, clinging to your clothing, all this type of stuff. So we basically set off on foot. I've got the bow, James got the camera, and I used that fence post with a blackberry bush on the back end of it and the green sort of overgrowth of grass on the front end of it as my landmark. And it was very obvious to see. Again, this paddock had no vertical cover, like there were no trees anywhere near this area. So that sort of blackberry patch and fence post was like quite obvious to get to. And we'd done our due diligence and treated it as if as soon as we're on the ground, like we're going to be walking a step or two, glassing, walking a step or two, glassing. And in all honesty, like it's nearly futile in the sense that like there's no doubt in my mind that within 30 to 40 meters of us at certain points in that, there would have been hog deer that could probably hear us and just never broke cover. But we just went about our business trying to spot deer in case there were antlers visible in a low spot. And eventually, after probably half an hour, we got into the blackberry bush, and I was sitting there going, okay, perfect. From where we'd last seen him 3 or 4 hours ago, he was about 3 to 4 fence posts away from this blackberry bush in the open part of the paddock. So if we can get to this blackberry bush, not only have we got their bedding and feeding area coming from the left where all that cane grass is, and a bit of a lower area where we might be able to see something slip out of that, just shielded from a bit of the wind by that large wall of cane grass. But perfect if he is here and still in this sort of feeding area and he's just plonked down, he might get up at some point closer than we think. And if I'm sitting in that blackberry bush or on the sort of front edge of it, at least I'll have that blackberry bush as a little bit of like coverage for me to draw. Because if you can imagine, I'm probably 6'1", I'd say. That was a joke. All right, I'm probably like 5'9", 5'10". So I'm not the biggest fella, but in this grass, which is probably, 4 foot high, You like that?
Short king, mate.
Yeah, I'm a short king. So anyway, in this grass that's probably around 4 foot high, it actually makes me feel quite tall. Like there's a fair bit of me that's exposed. And because there's not a single tree in the landscape, like part of my issue was, okay, if I can get to within 20 or 30 meters of a stag and he does step into an open spot, as soon as I go to elevate and draw back my bow and get clearance from the grass, he's going to spot me. Like I was treating it like a chittle deer. Like there's no way in open area without any vertical cover you're going to get a shot on a chittle deer stag 99 times out of 100. Like of course there's the time where they face away or they scratch or whatever, and it allows you to get an arrow away. But I was just trying to think practically, like, okay, this is my second stalk of the trip. I want to kill this deer, so I'm going to sit by this blackberry bush and try and use it as a bit of shade, a bit of cover to break up my outline should this deer stand up. Now that's where it gets interesting, because pretty much as I took my last step or two to get to within like a couple of meters of this blackberry bush, I heard the slightest little bit of a rustle, and it wasn't a stick breaking. I think it was like a stick which had been a dry bit of blackberry limb, which had probably been 30 centimeters off the ground. The stag was literally bedded 5 meters away from us, and we had no sign that he was there. There was no visible opportunity for us to see him. Like the bed that he was sort of buried into and just happy out of the breeze in the shade was like this perfect little hog deer nest. It was like if you imagine your dog coming in, you know, under your bed covers, rolling up into a little ball, and you just walked into the room, flicked the light on, and were like, called out the dog's name. If they just sat there under the covers and didn't move, like you're never going to see it. And that's exactly what this thing did. It basically was in this perfect little hidey hole. Where it got interesting was like I heard this tiny little rustle. It could have been the stag's antlers literally just touching the tiny little bit of dried blackberries. Whatever it was, it might have been him sort of moving in this little nest. But I heard it, and basically my mind, I think before I'd even seen the stag, was like drop. So I got down to like almost like a half squat. I had an arrow on the string for the last probably 50 meters. The release aid was in my mouth or in my hand, I can't really remember, but essentially I was ready to shoot this thing, but I physically could not see him. Dog's name, if they just antlers, and he stood up at 5 meters, and I don't know what James was thinking at this point in time, but I was sitting there going like, how the hell had we not been able to see him? And then when he stood up and I could see his antlers so visibly at 5 meters, I was like, that's great. I know where he is. He's sort of like semi-alert. He's obviously heard something or whatever, or maybe it's just that time of the day where 3 hours after he originally bedded, he's got up again. But I was like, this is great, but I literally couldn't even see his ears or the top of his head. I could just see the tips of his antlers from where I was, and there was absolutely no way that I could shoot him.
Leopold optics deliver unmatched clarity. I'm running the 10x50 Santin binoculars, and Ayden's running the BX4 range-finding binoculars. It's their low light capabilities that make them stand out from the rest, spotting game at first light on our guided hunts long before our other hunters with their inferior binoculars. Rugged, reliable, and engineered for the field, Leopold lets you spot game and judge distance with absolute confidence. Don't miss a moment. Go to Venture Hunting and Outdoors website and upgrade your vision and your hunt with Leopold, the optics trusted by serious hunters worldwide.
Yeah, it was just like like we talk about, like obviously hunting together a lot and like having sign language and just like even reading, you know, human behavior. Like I saw Ayden like just half squat, and I like just straight away brought the camera up, and I'm like, okay, there's something here that like something's about to go down, and it's like close. Like you just get that feeling. And then that's where like I just noticed like straight away like the antlers sticking out the top of the blackberries. And so for me, through the camera, like was filming this stag, and like I'm only 2 meters behind Ayden, so he's probably only 8 meters from me. And I could just see, because Ayden's sort of squatting down, so I'm standing straight up. I could only just see, like just the tips of his ears. And this stag is like Ayden said, he's not really alert. He's just sort of like, he's obviously heard something. And he's like looking around and like sort of looking our way, but then like looking the other way, and he's like not really. And And yeah, it was just like cool to, like Ayden said, it was cool to be like right up there on a hog deer, but then it like we've sort of said before, it quickly became apparent this like ongoing issue where it's like, okay, well that's cool. We're like in this thing's personal space. We've like come and knocked on the bedroom door, but it's also like, now how do we actually like shoot this?
And that's what I was trying to work out. And like, I could feel my heart and the adrenaline obviously pulsing through my body. Like my heartbeat just went, I could feel it like vibrating. I'm probably sure the lav mics picked it up as well. But like, I then had to like say, all right, calm down, like very proactively analytical minded, like this is great, but where are your open spots? Like, where's he going to step through? Should he move? Like there was a fair chance in my head. I was like, he might, if I just sit here quietly, like he hasn't seen me, he might just rebed. Like I'm sure that he's used to other deer moving around, that when it's windy, you know, bits of blackberry make a rustling noise, all this type of stuff. And as I said, because we had that noise concealment of the wind, we'd been moving one step at a time. It wasn't like he'd heard me trudging through the bush like an elephant and then just went, oh, holy shit, there's definitely something there. It was like, I'm just standing up because I'm either stretching, gonna rebed, or maybe I've heard something. I just want to kind of get out of the grass so I can hear a little bit better. And that's sort of the decision that I had made, is that it was one of those three options. So I very quickly sort of assessed that, okay, from where he is, whilst he's hidden now, if he sort of takes a few steps away from me, there was almost like a bit of a flattened area in the grass that was almost like where they've walked religiously around this little blackberry bush where I might be able to shoot him. And then looked around and I was like, okay, and that's pretty much it. Like the rest of the grass is as high, if not taller, than this immediate area. So in my mind then and there, I was like, okay, this is my opportunity to shoot him. Like the second he goes to walk away, I'm going to draw back the bow and try and either stop him, or hopefully he just like takes a step and I can, you know, get a shot away before he just disappears into this long grass. And I think a little bit of that in retrospect was just built on that anxiety of like, he's at 5 meters. I've waited 5 days for this opportunity of a hog deer within bow range. If he leaves that gap, I'm going to lose him to the sea of grass. And that potentially might not have been a reality, but in the same aspect, we had watched for days where like once those deer stand, they just move, and often they just go and bed in like even thicker impenetrable cover. So I didn't want to waste that opportunity on this particular stag. And again, the second that he started moving away, from where I was sort of looking over the blackberry bush, so I had a little bit of cover blocking me. And as soon as I saw his antlers rotate as if he was going to start to move, I took up tension and started drawing back that bow. And he'd taken literally like a step or two as I'd got to full draw. And whether he'd heard me come to full draw and like shuffle my feet slightly in the long dry grass, or he'd seen my movement, which is probably more the fact that because it was getting towards the afternoon, the sun was on my back. It might have been I was fairly illuminated or silhouetted, plus that action of me, you know, drawing back the bow, starting to come up above the grass because I needed every bit of elevation to shoot down into the grass when he presented a shot. Whether he saw that, he basically, being like a mature deer, just didn't take anything for granted. He barked, didn't take a second look over his shoulder, and immediately put about 30 to 40 meters between us and him. And as quickly as this little opportunity had arose, like it had just gone like that. And to be honest, like I just wanted to like drop to my knees and sort of crumble, but I also didn't want to educate this deer. So I just sat there at full draw while he ran to about 30 to 40, watched him. And again, he sort of like turned to look back and then was sort of just like half sitting there eating, took a few steps, looked back again. And I think he'd just probably, in all honesty, thought, look, I haven't been hunted for a year, or I don't even see humans. Humans are a part of the landscape. I often hear cars drive through when they're checking water, blah, 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 doing fences. That was probably just the blackberry bush moving in the wind. Like it wasn't that egregious of like an attack on his personal space, even though it was at super close range at 5 meters. It wasn't like he was in knee-high grass and saw me super clearly. Like he didn't actually turn his head. It was almost like he heard something behind him as he was walking through the long grass. And I wonder if that just meant that like, oh, he went, oh shit, there could be something there. I'm just going to move. Oh, now I've moved 30 to 40 meters away. for a hog deer, that could nearly be a whole different sort of realm or region of the property almost. And he basically just like, after a minute or two, disappeared into the long cane grass, and that was basically it for me. That was essentially my opportunity on a hog deer done and dusted, which was rather devastating for it to be that close. But it was actually like super rewarding being able to kind of implement for the first time a plan of like, okay, if a deer moves to a spot where I think I can identify that it's bedded, I'm going to take the opportunity and get in there. Like, it was not like chiddle deer, for example, that I cut my sort of teeth on, where like seeing them is one thing, but then you've got to stalk them for 6 hours and make sure they don't spot you and the birds don't give you up. It's like with these hog deer, the biggest, most challenging thing was seeing the deer go to bed in a certain area. And once they did, it's like you could nearly run into 30 meters and then start hunting them from there. And learning that, I think, proved very important for the next few days of the trip.
Yeah, I wouldn't say necessarily run into 30, depending on the country. That, like, if they're in tall stuff, maybe, but yeah, depending, like, I'd say 50, you can sort of pretty confidently just sort of go into and then slow down from there. But it, yeah, definitely sort of gave us the foundation where, I guess, trying to learn as fast as we can and just get our database going, I guess, of what stalks have worked and what haven't, and probably made us a bit more ambitious, I guess, on creating opportunities from, you know, seeing deer where, yes, we don't want to pressure these deer, but it's also like, as bow hunters, we're not going to be able to shoot them from the hide. So, you know, don't necessarily be afraid to go down there and try and make something happen. Yeah, if a half decent opportunity presents itself. So that was sort of it for Ayden for now, and luckily for me, it was my turn to have a go on the hog deer, and yeah, it quickly, like, it changed so much so fast, in the sense of, maybe like our friends had said, but like, yeah, we just woke up like the next morning and like all of a sudden there was like stags on our place, and especially like, which was just refreshing, because like we'd seen a lot of stags in the 5 days that Ayden was hunting, but it wasn't like, like we said, they might have just been like 200 meters over the boundary fence, or 300 meters over the boundary fence, or 70 meters over the boundary fence, or you see them like at first light, but then they, you know, they walk 30 yards and then walk over the boundary fence, and then they hang out there for 20 minutes and they walk in and bed up, you know what I mean? So whereas now there was at least deer starting, like, you know, at first light in the mornings and stuff, we were like seeing stags, and then they were going back into the bedding area and actually like bedding up on the place that we could hunt them.
I think another big factor was, as I said earlier, on the 5th afternoon, our friend ended up harvesting that mature hog deer stag, the malform. So that was part of it too, is that we now had, again, he would have loved to have taken the even 15 to 16 inch model, but like, he was forced legally through this GMA with one male tag. He's now taken a deer that he was absolutely stoked to take, but he then went back to work. He then had to go and check in his deer, which we can talk to here in a second. But it meant that from having two people with different interests and different sort of hunting strategies in the blind, like, James now had free reign of the property, and every single stag that we saw that was of a mature caliber, like, we were able to make a play on should the opportunity arise.
So the first morning of my hunt, we saw plenty of deer, which was like I said earlier, it was ecstatic, but none of them had bedded in a location that we thought, you know, was sort of out more in the field. Like, they'd gone back into the thicker cane grass bedding area, which sort of worked out, because what we'd actually planned to do that morning was go in with our friend to the GMA check-in station and actually watch the process, just realizing, like, for us, like, how difficult it was going to be successful, and, you know, extremely inquisitive people like we, you know, with the whole system and model and having respect of what they're doing down there, we just sort of took the opportunity to be like, hey, can we actually come into the GMA office check-in station and watch the process of checking in a deer. And it was the guy, like, so we called up. Normally our dad Nico was there as well, so we had 4. The gentleman normally only allowed 2. It was nice enough because we called up to have all 4 of us, and we were able to watch the process, which was really, really interesting. All the data that they take on these stags. So just like a quick run through, I guess. So they do like the first one, that you wheelbarrow these little stags or hinds in. So you've got to check in every deer that you shoot in designated check-in spots. And the first thing they do is weigh them. They then do a nose to base of tail length. They then get like a height, a shoulder height of the left and right limb. They do antler length as well, left and right antler, as well as girth of like chest girth of the animal as well. So they've taken a fair bit of data there. And then the next most interesting part is they actually get a piece of the jaw, where they go in and they take a piece of the lower mandible on one side, where they've got this tool, and it's like incredible to watch, where so the first thing they do is almost put like like the instrument is like an owl, like a wire framed owl, and so you've got a handle.
It almost looks like the end of a coat hanger. If you imagine like the end of a coat hanger where it slides in along the cheek and between that jawbone. And like James was saying, it's got an owl, like a bit of a handle. It goes down into this sort of, it's all made out of metal. And that slides in sort of to the back of the jaw just to loosen it. And then they go in with these bolt cutters and they crunch the jaw in a couple of places so that it allows that jaw to be loose. And then, as James was saying, they can pass this L-shaped tool to the back of the mouth or the back of the jaw and basically hook onto that bone that they've now separated from the rest of the jaw.
Yeah, to expand on the first thing they do is actually they use the like coat hanger shaped owl, like the wire frame, to like detach all the muscle off. So it's quite they're breaking down all the jaw muscle off the bone and all that cheek tissue and all your like the inside of your lips essentially. If you imagine like on one side of your face, they remove the attachment for all of that, and then cut the back of the jaw, and then they slide the frame, like the loop, over the back of where they've cut, so that the coat hanger shaped owl is then looped around, and they like pull on that, and then what it does is it like de-articulates the fuse, because your jaw, like you've got a left and a right side of your lower jaw, and as you become an adult, like when you're a baby and your face is growing in all species, those bones increase in length, and then what actually happens is at a certain period for different animals, they will fuse at the front where your like front, your front teeth are, where your front incisors are. And it's the same with all ungulates. So it's the same with like all of our sheep and cattle and all those species and stuff. So there's actually a joint there that if you put enough pressure on, it breaks. And so what they do is they slide the L-shaped coat hanger metal frame thing over the back where they've cut the mandible, put it over it, and then they rip forward on the jaw, which then causes enough pressure to break that front joint, and they pull out like a section, like one half of a section of the lower jaw. And so from that, what they can do is they can first DNA your animal and use that to reference in the future, but they can also look at it and sort of age the animal that you've shot on how old they think it is, which it's just a super interesting, like for us, it's like the only thing close to sort of that American game model, which we really respect here in Australia. And so it was just like super interesting to see. Like we were probably a pain in the ass a little bit, just with how many questions we had for the officer, and he was great about it. But yeah, he conducted himself really well, considering, yeah, like I said, all the dumb questions we probably asked. But yeah, it was really interesting to see.
And just for like everyone's imagination, like you can imagine with all this plethora of knowledge, like they're then going and putting in like, okay, for an animal that stands 75 centimeters at the shoulder, it should, you know, they can nearly plot graphs in the sense of like an animal that is 16 inches is normally 5 years of age. They normally have a chest girth of X amount of centimeters. For them to be that weight, they normally have this sort of height at the shoulder. And basically from there, you get this baseline of a population, and like they do this for both males and females. So they're working out, you know, the average hog deer stag that's shot might be, you know, I'm sure it differs on public and private and all this type of stuff, and based on nutrition and regions and wherever they're shot. But like, you suddenly start getting this robust sort of data, and it's like a biological survey of the species and how they're doing here in Australia. Like, okay, we're getting more and more older animals shot that are 16 inches, 5 years of age, and they're mature animals. Like, okay, no, the population's shifting this way. Like, it's really, really interesting, and it gives them, like, again, a way to manage these animals as a game species, because I don't know if we mentioned it at the start when we were talking about hog deer, but they're from Southeast Asia. A lot of them come from like India, Sri Lanka, those sort of countries, and back in their home ranges, they're actually endangered. So like, whilst we're able to hunt them here in Australia for the month of April, the whole reason why they're not just declared a pest animal like so many of our other deer species here in Australia is because there's an invested interest to maintain them as a stronghold and a bit of a bloodline genetic refuge for a species that's in peril back home in their native home range. So by knowing a bit more about the species, by knowing, you know, at what age they're mature and they reach a certain weight and they're of, you know, biological, like, has the female had a fawn before? Is the female a fawn? Is she lactating? Is she not? Like, and if they measure 100 hog deer females in the region in the month of April and 99% of them are lactating, they can sort of then derive when their rut is, or are they all in early pregnancy, or are they all mid to late gestation of pregnancy? Like, there's so much information they can get from all of these little surveys and questions and check-ins and weighings and stuff that they do. And it's just a really cool way to approach wildlife management here in Australia. And like, I understand they're a feral animal, but at the end of the day, they are a resource. Like, it would be interesting to know and speak to someone eventually from the GMA, which could be a future podcast topic for us, but just how much revenue, or how many people apply for tags each year, how many people get a game license each year in the state of Victoria purely to hunt hog deer. Like, I'm a Queensland resident, so there's no way I would be getting a Victorian game license if it wasn't to go and hunt hog deer on private and public land. Do you know what I mean? So that in its own right, I think my fee for 3 years was around $300 for just the license itself. And then as part of that, every year you can get tags whilst you've got a license, an active license. So I just think that's amazing. Like, you do that over 100,000 people or hunters that are keen to hunt hog deer. That's an extreme amount of revenue that's being raised for game management. And it's just, yeah, a way that, yes, this is a feral pest species, but if you place a value on it, it has a resource sort of value. It suddenly becomes a lot more of an asset rather than just a problem, which is a really cool way to look at wildlife.
Yeah, like we said, it probably takes on that more like North American big game model where, you know, hunting is it seems like it's shifting a little bit now, sadly, but yeah, hunting has always been, you know, about like, you know, getting meat and like that culture of like the great outdoors and public land and that type of thing. And it's very much like that down there. Like, you know, there's plenty of public land to go and chase hog deer. Yes, it's harder, like in the US, but there is every opportunity that you're going to shoot a really big hog deer on public land. Like we saw actually in our scouting one afternoon back in February, we went into the public land and we saw like a beautiful 15-inch hog deer in there. And like we said, like, yeah, he was out of season. So we just took some cool photos and videos and stuff of him. But, you know, the big hog deer run around on public land. It's just that they're really hard to get. We actually know someone that got a 15-inch one this year and a 13-inch one as well on public. So it's like, you know, there's plenty of people doing it. It's just, yeah, you've got to put in the time an effort. But yeah, it's a cool system and a cool model that they've got down there. And just another probably side note as well was just with like the animals' weights and heights and stuff like that, because we're hunting private where there's like incredible nutrition all year round, and I mean a lot of the public's got incredible nutrition as well, but the something to note is like the deer on like Snake Island and Sunday Island and stuff like that, where it's all balloted, like they're significantly small. They're not necessarily smaller in antlers, but body size, they're significantly smaller in the sense that, like, you know, like a live weight 40 to 50 kilo deer may be like a big stag, whereas, you know, our ones, like, yeah, as we'll get to, like a 50 kilo deer gutted was like sort of the average of what was getting in weighed in. Like our friend's stag ended up going 51 kilos gutted, you know, so yeah, just for your references and knowledge when we're talking about this stuff.
With innovative and patented designs, Eberlestock are industry leaders when it comes to packs. Being avid hunters who delve into the backcountry, we require durable, customizable and reliable gear to get us into the mountains. We have been running their mainframe E-mod system with the Vapor 5000 pack and attachments. Their bino harness or chest rig with attachments like rangefinder and accessory pouches have been a game changer for run and gun style of hunts. We've recently returned from America and felt the weight of packing out a big bull elk, handling the antlers and meat easily, and can honestly say that they're the best packs we've ever used. If you're interested in feeling the same comfort and upgrading your pack setup today, check out Eberlestock, either online through their website or available in store at Venture Hunting Outdoors here in Australia.
I think if you attribute sort of the fact that, as James said, like Snake Island being a balloted area, those deer are minimalised resource-wise. Like they're competing, say there's 50 animals on an island, unless they physically swim tens of kilometres to another island or a shoreline on the main coast of Australia, they are stuck there with however dry, however diminished those resources for food are. So say there's 50 deer on that island, they're competing for that food source, and therefore, like, potentially biologically, they're a lot smaller of a deer. Like they still get the mature antlers, they still get a mature age class of animal with big antlers and whatnot, but they may have adapted to be 10 kilos smaller than the deer on the mainland that are getting hunted on private property. Because I pose to you guys, like, if there's 50 animals, just say on this private block, and it suddenly gets 100 dairy cows on that pasture, the feed dries up, there's no longer that nutritional availability and abundance, those 50 animals just walk under a fence, through like either a cattle fence or whatever, across a creek, across a river, and they just disperse, and they might move 5 kilometers away to a new habitat that is the exact same as where they previously were living, with a new abundance of feed. And that could, you know, in theory, be why they maintain this heavier weight than a lot of the deer that are on those islands. Like, it's obviously a lot easier for those hog deer to walk 3 kilometers than it is to potentially swim 3 kilometers to a new island or a new sort of, you know, coastline, for example. So that could just be that explanation as to why those deer that we were hunting are a lot more girthier, physically larger, same antler size and everything like that, but just as far as animals, they're a lot more stout, a lot bigger sort of version of hog deer.
And with that, after checking in our one, we were very keen to go and try and find one for ourselves. So I went back to the hide in typical fashion, and yeah, did another all-day sit. And we saw a couple of deer, but very similar stories. Like, didn't really get an opportunity. Just had stuff come out like super late. We did see a couple of hinds and spikers and stuff earlier, but yeah, obviously not anything we wanted to shoot. And so we left them. But the next morning we woke up, and very similar story. Like it's almost like that cyclic wave of hog deer movement. We had a couple of stags in our area again, which was nice, and we'd seen a couple of stags move from this feeding area at first light into the thick bedding area, And we sat there all day and didn't really see much. The wind that afternoon though, like normally it'd been a prevailing, so we sit, like I said, it's mainly a prevailing wind direction from the east. We sit on the far western edge, so that everything on our, as we look at it, sort of everything on our right hand side we can hunt. And what we actually did that afternoon was we drove around the back of where their bedding area was, which, so getting down from the hide, lost visibility, and we went and to the far eastern corner, so almost diagonally across the paddock from where we normally sit. And what that meant was that we could then hunt them, like we were right on the fringe line between their feeding and their bedding area, which put us in a position where I was like, okay, this could happen like very quickly. And so like the last like 2 hours, 2.5 hours, we're like standing up, I'm standing up on a fence post, the corner post, with the neighbor. I've got like the only elevation that I can afford. I'm, 2 meters up in the air or 3 meters up in the air, because I'm actually 6 foot, because I'm a big dog. And we am looking out over the paddock, and it was like the last 10 minutes of light, and I'm like, there's a hog deer stag walking towards like a little trough in this like thick thing, in the thick bedding area. And so I like jumped down from the post. I like look at Ayden, like, we've got to go. Like, this thing's probably 250 meters away. And I'm like, we've been waiting like all day for something to happen so that we can like get an opportunity. And mind you, it's like 6:15. It's like getting dark, and it's like 5:45. So like it's pretty. It's getting like, the sun's sort of on the horizon, I guess. Like it's that very much the last light. And so we're like moving in, and as we move in, like in typical hog deer fashion, we blow out a hind out of the grass. We've been sitting in the hide like all day, and then we've been standing up on that fence post like all afternoon trying to like see any hog deer. And here's this hind that's been bedded in the grass like 100 meters from us for a couple of hours, and we haven't had any sign or seen any sign of her at all. So she did a little bark actually, which, as frustrating as it is, sounds super cute and just adds to the cuteness that is hog deer. And she went bounding off, and it was like at the same time that I actually had eyes on the stag, and he'd like gone past the trough, and he'd gone out over the fence into the paddock. And I'm looking at him, and I can see like the top of his back, and I can see his head looking around. And he just stood there for like a minute, and I'm like, okay, shit, what's gonna happen? And then all of a sudden he like put his head down, and I just saw him take it like a couple of steps, and then he sort of went into some longer stuff, and that's where I just like lost him. And so I'm like, okay, cool. He's like continued out into out into the paddock. Like he hasn't gone back into the thick stuff. He's like gone out into the paddock. And so in my mind, I'm like, cool, well, we've been sitting in the hide and on this post like all day, like haven't seen anything. Like I'm assuming he's going out to feed. And so my mind is going like 1,000,000 miles an hour, being like, okay, the light's fading. You need to get in on this stag. You can't see him anymore. We've just scared this hind, like heart's racing. And so I'm like, as quietly as I possibly can, moving through this, like, because I'm on the other side of the fence, I'm moving through this like, waist to chest high, like kabungi dock, like thistly shit that's just like all woody weeds that's just making like heaps of noise. And we're like walking, and I'm like glassing my ass off, like burning lasers into the grass, like trying to see a back or an ear or anything like that. And just like cannot see this deer for the life of me. I'm like, it should be right here. Like we're like, we've closed in from like 100 where he was, where I saw him like drop into the grass. And now we're at like, 30 to 40 meters off. And I'm like, we should be able to see this thing like walking around feeding. And then that's when Ayden goes, stop.
And that's when, like, for me, whilst James is creeping forward, like meter by meter, again, like half hastily trying to cover a bit of ground and catch up to this deer that could be feeding, I'm sitting there behind him, like videoing this whole process. But there's a certain point in my mind as the videographer, I'm like, okay, I've videoed him closing in on this hypothetical stag for like 15 minutes. He's been on a fence post for the last 3 hours. He's been in the blind for the whole day before that. Like, at some point, we've actually got to together like find this deer, and that's where like you sort of step away from being the videographer and go like, I need to help my brother find this stag so we can actually achieve like trying to video this deer. Like, we've got to turn this stalk into like, oh, there's a deer, like now this is what we're actually doing, like, and round out all the footage. And like, I then put the camera down for a second, and whilst James is taking a step, I'm taking a step, and like, because, you know, like, we've got so much footage of like walking in one step at a time. It's like, at some point we've got to find this stag. So I started actively glassing, and to be honest, I had no idea where the stag was, because I'd been looking through a camera the whole time. I'd just been sort of reading James's cues as to where he last saw him. And I was glassing out to our left in this theoretical, like, more open pasture, thinking, oh, he's going to be out there feeding, and like so many times, you just catch him in the right little spot and you'll just see a tiny little bit of their back or an antler or something. And I'm glassing, probably like not that far, 50 to 60 meters away. And I put my binos down, and I just remember going like, oh, maybe I should glass like 30 meters away and 20 meters away and just look for like antlers real close. And I put my binos up, see these like two white objects that end up being antler tips, put my binos down, go, yeah, there's definitely something there, put my binos back up again, and this is all like in a split second, put my binos up again. And it wasn't until I like changed my focus from 40 meters away to like 15, like rack focused, and went, holy shit, that is like right there. And you know what gave it away is really interesting, is because there was a subtle breeze coming in, every single bit of grass, pasture, vegetation was like moving in that sort of rhythmic back and forth of a wind. Like, it can only, blade of grass can only blow one way as far as it can until, you know, natural swing of things, it comes back and then sort of, you know, goes back, and it's like an elastic band. It's going backwards and forwards, give and take in the breeze. And these two white tips that I'd just seen at 15 yards were not moving. Like, it was the only thing that was dead still. And I was like to James, like, stag right there, 15 yards. Like, sorry, hopefully you guys hear that on the mic. So I was like, stag right there, 15 yards. And I stopped glassing, put the binos away, get the camera up, and I just hit record, because I'm thinking like, there's no way this stag's going to remain at 15 yards for like longer. Like, it was sort of that sense of the last encounter we had where a stag just popped up super close range. It was 5 meters and he stood up, and like, it was 5 meters, like, this thing happened quick.
And that's where, for me, like, I think in my mind, because like I'd seen him like take those couple of steps, and it was like I said, that last bit of light. So in my mind, I'm like, okay, he's been bedded all day, he should be out feeding. I would not expect him to like walk out of the thick stuff and then at like right on last light just be like, oh, you know what, like, oh, my legs are a bit sore, I'm just gonna have another little kip here before I feed for a bit. And, you know, like, then that's what I mean. Like, their behavior is just like, as sort of semi-patternable as they are, they're just like super erratic as well. Like, where they'll just like, because they've got almost like no pressure and no time constraints, it's like, oh yeah, I'll just feed now and bed now and feed now and bed now. Like, and so this thing's like bedded, but the problem is, like, I'm looking for a standing deer. So Ayden's like 15 yards, and I'm like looking and looking and looking and looking and like trying to like see where this hog deer is. And like, I'm just like blanking out. I'm just like, where the hell is this thing? And then it wasn't until I just like, like probably the same thing as Ayden described, where you've just got these two white sticks that like aren't moving. I was like, holy shit, he's like right there. And so like, it's probably taken me honestly like 30 seconds since Ayden's been like 15 yards right there, maybe a little bit less, I don't know, but like, it was like a long time considering he was at 15 yards for me to like see. Like, I remember being like, where? And he's like 15 yards right there. I'm like, still doesn't help me, bro. Like, still can't see this deer, sort of thing. And yeah, when I actually saw him, like, straight away I was like, okay, cool, that's the stag, he's bedded right there, and I can see his antlers, I can see his antler tips, and I can just see the tips of his ears, and I knew that he was like facing straight towards us, like he was like listening, and like he may have even seen us like walking, because that's the thing, like, these things, get walked past and driven past all the time. Like, they're not like, unless you almost stand on them, like one of their biggest defense is like, that dumb hunter is just going to walk right past me again, isn't he? You know what I mean? Like, they just don't break. Like, they just hold their position. And I honestly think it was like a little bit of that, probably a little bit of the grass moving like over his eyes and stuff. We were like moving quickly, but we're stalking, like we're being very deliberate with like foot placement and going, not trying to go through like the dock and stuff like that. And but yeah, I'd like obviously seen that he was like facing our direction, and because of that I was like, we have no cover here. Like, I can see the tops of his ears, like he's probably looking at us right now. There's two of us standing here, and so like I'm so slowly like started like lifting my bow from, it was like had an arrow on the string and was sort of down up to like almost a position where you'd actually shoot from. But because we're at 15 meters and we're in no cover at all, like I'm doing this in like micro movements, because in my head it wasn't like I'm like, okay, he knows we're here, but it's also like if he fully knew we were here, he would have run by now. You know what I mean? Like, if he was just like, boom, that's a hunter or whatever, like I'm sprinting out. Where he's like, I'm like, he hasn't done that. So it's like, okay, don't just be like super rash and like put your bow up and straight away draw back. Like, try and actually do it all like slowly. And so, I mean, it actually worked out pretty cool for the footage, but we like, so I'm like slowly getting my bow up and I'm probably halfway through that period, and this stag actually stands up at like 15 meters and he's like, boom, straight, like face, like he's broadside looking at us. And it's like, okay, now we're like, now we're in a little bit of trouble. But the big thing for me was like, I was looking at him and his ears were like flicking around. Like, he's had one ear on us and one ear behind us and stuff. Like, he was like, I'm like, you're like 75% alert / like ready to go, but you're also like a bit like, oh, like could be a post that I've never seen before that just popped up there, and that could be his buddy. And so I'm like sitting there, I've got the bow up in front of my face. I reach into my bino harness and pull which I'd like, normally I keep it in the side pocket of my bino harness, like my hinge. I'd pulled it out so that the like handle bit was like sticking out, so I can literally just go like tink and like quickly pull that out, or not quickly, but pull that out silently, and then slowly over like a couple of seconds raise that from onto the string and get tension on the string. And then I waited specifically until his like ears were like back and like listening behind him and stuff. And then that's when I'm like, okay, I'm going to slowly start drawing here. And that's where it's like, it's super important. Like, I shoot an 80-pound bow, and it's like situations like that where it's like people are like, oh, you shoot an 80-pound bow? And it's like, yeah, but like I drew that bow back over probably 6 seconds. Like, so that's where I like slowly like I almost kept like pushed out with my left hand. I'm a right-handed shooter, and like it was just like so slow that I like drew it back as to try and like not, like obviously it made movement, but it was like trying to keep everything as like in line as like in sync as possible. Like the bow didn't move up, the bow didn't move down, didn't move left and right, wiggle, whatever. It was just like the slowest, most like, yeah, calculated draw I could possibly do. And when I got it back and he was still there, I was a little bit amazed, but like I was like, okay, this is like sick. And then the next thing was, I was like, okay, I can now, even with him standing, there's like grass over the top, like there's grass like halfway up his body. And so I'm like, I'm gonna aim like 2 inches below the grass line. And so I could like see the head down to his neck, and then like the shape of like the front leg where it like humps. And then I'm like, okay, then I can see the grass line, and I'm gonna aim like 2 or 3 inches below that. And so pretty quickly I've like gone, aimed, and then the thing is like, so I shoot a hinge release. So like, as people that have shot a hinge release know, like it's like there's no like boom, jump on the trigger. Like you sort of can if you want to, but for me, I like really try and like, I don't know, have like a shot sequence, because like it's been one of my biggest issues in hunting has been like just rushing that shot. And like, even though this was like very quick from getting it back, in the sense of it was like, okay, that's where I need to aim. Boom, aim there. He's at 15 yards. So I mean, like, it's not like you know, you're holding for super long. And I'm starting to like go through my shot sequence. And then that's when he actually started like turning to go. And so in like dropping to turn to go. And so I'm like pulling through as he like turns to go. And we just watch this arrow just like shoot over this thing's back, even at like 15 meters, which like, I was like, in hindsight, I'm like, and like, even at the time, I said to Ayden, like straight away after like doing the film, which you guys will watch, I'm like, I literally wanted to like cry. I'll be honest. Like, I was like, we've sat, you know, it's day 7 now. We've had like, that's the first well and truly like best encounter. You know, like we've been killing ourselves for these opportunities. Like it felt and still feels like almost impossible. And then like to have that happen, especially when Ayden, like I almost feel like I'd let Ayden down a little bit when he'd like seen it so clearly. And for me, just like in my mind, just like, you know, because if I'd maybe got my bow up sooner and then like could have drawn when he stood, well, it may have been like a very different scenario. And, you know, like I was just, yeah, I was pretty broken. Like, I'm not going to lie. I was a bit of a shell of a man. I was like immediately thankful that I hadn't hit him, because like, you know, as much as I wanted a hog deer, it's like, you never want to like wound something like, or any of that, like, or yeah, potentially do a bad shot, just for the sake of like getting one. And so, yeah, I was thankful in that sense, and like knew that we'd missed, or I'd missed. But yeah, obviously just like, it was probably just all the built up frustration, like all the, you know, you get in your own head a bit, like, how the hell are we going to get this done? You know, like, it's been there 7 days, haven't like, you know, we've only had sort of 2 stalks now, like 2 good stalks where we've been like inside bow range, and we've worked bloody hard for that. And yeah, it just, I don't know, like it sort of was just a lot of emotion, to be honest, and like a hard pill to swallow that, okay, yep, that's probably going to be it now for our hunt.
Whether you're chasing your next big hunt or perfecting your target archery game, precision is everything. That's where Option Archery comes in. Specialising in the quiverizer and option sights, they deliver the accuracy and reliability every serious archer demands. Lightweight, durable, and engineered to perform. Those are the tools that make every shot count. Upgrade your bow setup and see the difference on your next hunt. I've particularly enjoyed the 4S sight. Transitioning from other single pins, I've enjoyed the benefit of having the option to be able to dial in a single pin or multi-pin setup. The horizontal pin orientation has also helped with my target panic and sight picture, dramatically improving my shooting. Head to Venture Hunting and Outdoors website to order your Option Archery gear today, because every shot deserves precision.
As bitterly sort of disappointing as it was, it also gave me this sense of like, hey, this is achievable. We've still got a few days left up our sleeve. Like, we've literally had what felt like 2 stalks on hog deer, and we'd got to 5 meters for me and got to full draw. And then the next time we stalked a hog deer, James got to 15 meters and got to full draw and let off a shot. It's like, one way of thinking about it is how James just described, and that's like probably the rawness of the moment of like, that was my opportunity, it's gone. But as we've learnt on so many of these longer hunts and like trips like the America, where you're like hunting for one bull elk for a month or one opportunity for a month, or, you know, just so many of these bow hunts that just teach you that like, it's consistency, it's determination, it's being perseverant, it's like all these traits that ultimately lead you through just sheer determination of like unwillingness to give up, that eventually you're going to get closer and closer and closer. And like, it's not through not failing, not through not making mistakes, but it's through recognizing that and going like, okay, we're doing this right, we're doing this wrong, let's amend it slightly and keep going and keep going and keep going. And so I actually left that encounter being like, no, that actually felt good. Like, we've had 2 stalks, 2 really close calls, like, let's keep doing this. And one thing that was really interesting is that on my first stalk on that deer, I remember walking away from it because, again, like seeing his antlers at 5 meters, like I didn't need to look at footage. I didn't need to look at, you know, him again. I just said to James, like, he's broken his antler from fighting. Like one of his antler tips are snapped off. And I remember looking at the footage of this stag, and again, like, it's 15 meters, it is crystal clear. Like, we've posted it up on the Instagram or on YouTube shorts and stuff for people. Like, it's on our socials. You can go and see this stag. Like, he's a beautiful deer. I think he's around 12 inches in length. He's obviously been battling, fighting. Like, he's got broken tips, he's got a little bit of a broken inner, like, nice mature deer. But we quickly realised that where I stalked that deer to where James just stalked that deer and had a shot at was like 50 metres in a straight line. Like, this stag is 100% the same deer, same broken antler, same long antler, same broken inner on that side, and has bedded twice now in a few days within 50 metres of the same location. So we were kind of going like, whilst we've spooked him and whilst we've scared him, it hasn't obviously been enough for him to change his pattern. And for me, like, that gave me, one, extreme confidence in like, hey, we're getting a few reps in on stalking these hog deer, but two, like, we're obviously not pressuring the deer that much. And like, as much as we've just stalked this stag, there's every chance another stag's going to walk in and like come into this realized, you know, good bedding area and might give us another opportunity with a few days left up our sleeve. Alrighty, legends, as you guys can hear, James and I are so passionate about these tiny little frustrating deer. You've sort of heard a bit of a background into the hunt, as well as a few early stalking situations for myself, James, our friend. Hope you guys are enjoying the hunt so far. What we're going to do, because this podcast has gone for so long and we want to tell you all of the details about these incredible little deer, the hog deer that we've been hunting, we're going to split this episode up into 2 parts. You're now listening to part 1, and we're going to make sure that you guys jump onto the Twin Elements podcast next week for part 2. So that's it for now. Because we're on the road driving back to New South Wales, we're not going to be doing FAQs today, but next week in part 2, once we're home, we will be updating that. You guys can listen to the full story where I'm going to break it to you now. James succeeds and he's able to take a beautiful mature hog deer stag. So hope you guys are keen for that. We're keen to share it all with you. That you can catch next week on the Twin Elements podcast. If you guys have any FAQs that you want answered on future episodes, please send either James, myself, or the Twin Elements Instagram or socials a DM. We've been getting smashed and inundated lately with red deer sort of tactics, but the year is moving on. There's going to be rooster deer, sambar deer, chital deer, all different types of hunting, as well as US discussions and talk to be had. So make sure you guys send us any hunting related questions, outdoor related questions, whatever it may be. If you don't want it featured on the podcast, we're happy to try and educate you guys, try and, you know, give you guys our experience and first-hand knowledge that we've got from the field. You can also email us at info@twinelements.com.au and we'll get back to you there. But for now, that's it. Catch all of our recent YouTube and adventures over on the Twin Elements YouTube. We've got our Cayuga Adventures trip where we go and hunt Tusky Cape York boars in North Queensland dropping over the next few weeks. Then we're going to kick it off with some USA hunts, followed by the Red Deer Roar from this year. So there's probably another 30 weeks of content there. As always the case, if you enjoyed this podcast, and please continue to like, comment, rate the podcast, share it with a friend. We absolutely love these discussion, in-depth sort of analysis of our hunting successes and stories. But for now, we will see you next week on the Twin Elements podcast.